Welcome to Epithets, exploring the sacred titles of Hekate.
She sped off like a bird soaring over land and sea, looking and looking, but no one was willing to tell her the truth. Not once did she take of ambrosia and nectar sweet to drink in her grief, nor did she bathe her skin in water. But when the 10th bright dawn came upon her, Hecate came to her, holding a light ablaze in her hand. A selection from the Homeric Hymn to Demeter, translated by Gregory Nagy. Welcome to Epithets, everyone. I'm your one of your hosts, Isaac Vars, with my co-host, Robin Silverman.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about Phosphoros, the epithet for Hecate, Phosphoros. And I'm excited about this one. It is a really fun one to kind of explore, especially with uh, the myth to the myth of Persephone. And anyway, I'm gonna actually hand it over to Robin before I go too far, because Robin's gonna tell us a little bit about the basic etymology of the word and what phosphorus means.
All right. Well, phosphorus means light bearing. Phos is light. Phoros is bearing sort of in the sense of carrying something, holding something. It's often translated as torch bearing, even though the word itself in Greek doesn't have a direct reference to torches. Phos is light. So this idea that Hecate holds the light. It's a epithet that's actually used of multiple different deities. It's often used of Artemis. And you can actually, sometimes in the iconography, you might see a picture of a goddess holding two torches and think it's Hecate, but sometimes it's actually Artemis because it gets used interchangeably with her. It's also been used of Dionysus. It's been used of Hephaestus. It's been used of course, the Latin version of Phosphorus is Lucifer, so we have that reference as well. Phosphoros is actually at one point used in the Bible to describe Christ, which is interesting. So, and it also can be literally can mean the morning star. So it has a lot of different references, but in the case of Hecate, it almost always refers to her torches, to the fact that she brings light.
And that is a really telling thing, even with when those torches are with Artemis or Diana. That's kind of I don't know. They're interchanged a lot in iconography, it seems, as well as sometimes in what they rule over. Talk about Hecate's connection to the moon, and if I'm not mistaken, that kind of came with her conflation with Artemis, because that wasn't something that she just traditionally had an association with. It was either Artemis or Selene, except for maybe Dipnon, if I'm not totally destroying any historical truth here. Is
No,
that
not at all. I do think the sort of moon association came about kind of gradually. Definitely the conflation with Artemis, and also this idea of the moon as liminal. The moon is between the earth and the sun, and so Hecate being associated with the moon in that way is associated with her liminality. But yeah, sort of the conflation, you can see it especially in the PGM, this conflation, Artemis, Selene, Hecate, as kind of having a lot of overlap and sometimes even being used to refer to the same goddess. There's actually, like I said, there's some confusion in the
hmm.
past over some, now I'm forgetting the name of the shrine, but there's a shrine to Artemis that for a while I think people thought was a shrine to Hecate just because of the torch iconography. I think that was at Ephesus, but I'd have to look that up. But I'm sort of pulling that out of memory. But yeah, there's a lot of overlap there, and yeah, a goddess with torches could be Hecate, it could be Artemis.
And I was trying to there's something scratching at the back of my mind. A few different old world goddesses that kind of predate Hekate that also had torch-bearing aspects, and I think also crossroad aspects. And I know it's a terrible thing to be like, I kind of remember something, but I don't remember what it is. But here we are. Uh, so I will continue digging for that, and I'll try to have that for us by the next episode. Hekate gets a lot of Lightbringer aspects in many of her epithets. A few other epithets that would be connected could be Aglaeos, which is radiant, uh, Dataphoros, Torchbearer, Didocus, also Torchbearer. Robin and I, before this episode started, were kind of talking about the difference between Phoros and Dokos, and Robin kind of touched on that a little bit when she was talking about the meaning of Phosphorus. Pastaphaesa, wide, wide shining. I'm trying to read my chicken scratch here. It really was kind of, I did not have good penmanship with this list. Phoebe, which is bright. And I think that's also usually associated with Apollo, if I'm not mistaken, which is really interesting because of that connection, Apollo having been called Hekatos, far worker, but in a masculine sense.
Yeah.
So uh, that again, that weird conflation between Hekate and the moon sometimes seems to be connected to how she's paired so much with solar deities, like in the
Mhm.
PGM, or the story that I'm going to go over a little bit when I talk about the story of Demeter and Persephone. Helios plays a big role in that. That's kind of so it's really interesting how she has this aspect where she's connected to something very solar, and I could see how that would kind of push her into a lunar place, even though, I don't know, my personal relationship when working with her is lunar adjacent more than lunar. But uh, let's see, I went off a little bit on Phoebe there. Uh, Faust, which the list I got this from says holy light, but Faust would just be light, right?
Yeah, yeah. Phosphoros is just means light. But
Hmm.
in context,
And here,
something like sort of a fundamental light.
mhm. And then the other one I had was Pyrophoros, which is fire bearer, but also would mean torch bearer because that's kind of how you're
Yeah.
bearing fire, unless you are literally on fire, and that is problematic. Uh,
Mm.
I'm a little, I'm really curious about how Hephaestus gets, that epithet of Phosphoros. That's kind of an interesting rabbit hole that I personally never want to go down because it's like, okay, that's hmm.
Yeah, that could be a fun sidetrack. I'm assuming it has to do with his capacity as a smith and working with, a forge.
Right. So the what I had read to start the episode was a little piece from the Homeric Hymn to Demeter, and that's kind of the story of Demeter and Persephone. And if you're not familiar with that story, Demeter is a Hellenic harvest goddess. I'm going to be using broad strokes, and if I go too broad, Robin, please interject and be like, no, 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 wait, be more specific. And Demeter's daughter is Persephone. Hades falls in love with her, kind of abducts her, just pulls her down to the underworld, and her scream is heard, but by some people or some deities. Demeter notices that her daughter's gone, looks for her, freaks out. This is actually kind of where the world starts kind of dying off. Things are getting cold. Winter comes, and Hecate is the one that shows up, and nobody wants to say anything because nobody wants to rat out Hades. And Hecate shows up, and she's like, I heard it happen. I didn't see it. Let's go talk to Helios, the Titan of the sun, and see what he saw. Because the sun's in the sky, he's an all-seeing eye. We go talk to Helios. He talks about what happened, and long story short, because this is more about Hecate than Demeter or Persephone. We come to an agreement to have Persephone in the underworld for half the year and then with her mother for half the year. And Hekate takes on the role to lead her back and forth from the underworld to the upper world. And that goes back to her torch-bearing aspect, which ties her to Phosphoros, which is why we're here and talking about this as not only the deity who lights the way back and forth through the dark, also a very liminal aspect. Hekate is one of the few deities that has no problem going between worlds, hangs out in the heights of Olympus, everyday world, and then going to the underworld. That she doesn't really care about where she's going. She can access that. She's cool with that. Um, but yeah, not only that, but she was the one that was willing to tell the truth, bringing Phosphoros as in setting light, as in bringing light to the truth of the matter, not being afraid of illuminating what really happened. So using that idea of illumination in a very, I guess, metaphorical way. Also somebody who reveals mysteries just in general. But that would be the story of Demeter and how I would see Phosphorus fitting into there. Robin found some interesting stuff about the epithet Phosphorus or how it's been historically used.
Yeah, I was actually looking up, incidences of it being used in Greek literature just to see different ways it was used. And this idea of Hekate Phosphoros as being the one who shows the truth, right? So the first place that I sort of lit on it was in a play by Euripides called Helen. And this play is a really weird play, as many Greek plays are. But in this play, the premise of this play is that Helen of Troy wasn't really abducted. She was just kind of hanging out in North Africa while the Trojan War was going on, and that the Helen in Troy was a phantom. So at the end of the Trojan War, Menelaus reclaims his wife Helen, but in the Euripides play, that Helen is actually fake. So he's actually being confronted now by the real Helen, and he's really confused. And Helen is, trying to prove that she's the real Helen, and she references her the cloak that Menelaus is wearing. Says, "Oh, that cloak, my father gave you that cloak." And Menelaus is really confused, and he says, "Oh, Hekate Phosphoros, send me visions that are favorable. Show me what's really going on." And that idea of, he doesn't know what's happening. He doesn't know what's going on. And he wants something to light the way, and he calls on Hekate Phosphoros to light the way. Which I thought was just, a beautiful illustration. But then I found another reference also in a Greek play, and this one by Aristophanes. In this play called the Thesmophoria Zeusai. And the Thesmophoria Zeusai is a play about, it's a comedy. Aristophanes was a comic playwright, and it's really filthy. If you read like an early 20th century translation, you will not catch how incredibly filthy it is, because they clean up the language a lot. But if you get a more recent translation, you can see it's a really filthy, funny, bawdy kind of play. And the premise is that there's this women's festival called the Thesmophoria, which actually is a festival for Demeter. There we go. There's that theme. But the heroes of the play, one of whom is Euripides, want to infiltrate the festival to find out what the women are really talking about. So this one guy, Nasilochus, he dresses up as a woman to infiltrate the festival. And of course the women catch on, and he's claiming now that he's Helen of Troy. And he actually references, "Oh, I'm from Sparta, Tyndareus is my father." Really just totally echoing the line from Euripides. And then one of the women, who's identified as the third woman in the play, says, "Oh, by Hekate Phosphoros, the word she uses is panorgos, which sort of means you're someone who'd do anything, but in a bad way." She's kind of cursing him out, but by Hekate Phosphoros, because she sees through the disguise. She sees the reality. So in both of those cases, there's this idea of Hekate Phosphoros as the one that you call on to show the truth, to show the way. show what's really going on, to see through disguises, to see through lies. And I really love that parallel because I'm a huge nerd for Greek literature. And Aristophanes was obviously parodying the Euripides play with that line. But yeah, that whole idea that Hekate Phosphoros is the one who shows the way, and specifically Hekate Phosphoros. And also just the way they both use that epithet in such an organic way, in a way like, they're not, it's not a religious context specifically, even though plays are generally religious. But just this is, how they talk. Like, oh, by Jove, oh, by Hekate Phosphoros. That this is just like what you would say when you want to know the truth.
And I love how just kind of maybe colloquial is maybe the word that I'm looking
Yeah,
for with this. The
yeah,
way that it's just so off the cuff. Like, of course, people talk like that. Like,
yeah.
oh, by Hekate Phosphoros. When you want to, when you're like saying, well, honestly, or something like that, where
Yeah,
it's just like, calling on the name of the goddess to that illuminates truth and seeing things clearly.
yeah.
I love how that metaphor, sometimes it feels like when going through some of the epithets and looking at the names and the meaning, it can, I always kind of get in my mind how easy it is to make more modern connotations of what these mean,
Mhm.
to make it relate to me. I know that I have a bunch of, maybe not a bunch, but there's a bunch of ways that I relate to epithets that I'm sure are not, to put it bluntly, historically accurate,
Mhm.
but still meaningful to me because that's in my experience, that's how I relate to Hekate or how I experience her. And with and I'm really happy that Phosphorus is one of those ones that actually has historical basis because that's how I would often relate to that epithet as the one that says the truth, that brings clarity, that shines light on mystery. The idea of her being the light in the dark when you're in a dark place or confusing place, she's the one that can help bring light to the situation in that metaphorical sense where you can see the truth of it and see clearly.
Yeah. I also think of it in sort of my own modern practice. This whole idea of the occult, right, is the hidden stuff, the hidden secret.
Yeah.
And she's the one who lights up the way to find out what's hidden. So this idea of her as the goddess of witches, she's the one who shows us the things that are hidden. And that's what we're about.
Mhm. Also with the liminality, we were talking a little bit about, you know, phosphorus being related to the morning star.
Mhm.
And the reason why it's called the morning star is just the planet Venus. It's just one of the first bright things you see in the sky, outside the moon when the sun sets or when the sun rises, depending on where Venus is, because Venus is generally very close to the sun. Uh, that's why if you're, an astro nerd, if you're into astrology, you know that your Venus placement will be somewhere close to your solar placement, usually either in that sign or the sign before or after, depending on where it is. And that's just also because Venus is closer to the sun. We have that sort of astrological optical illusion. But her being the first thing we kind of see when the sun's setting or when the sun's right before the sun's about to rise, that ties that back to that liminality, I guess is what I'm saying. The liminality of Hekate, she who's kind of in between. Even in the Homeric hymn, dim to Demeter, hymn to Demeter, uh, when Hekate comes to Demeter, it's right at the dawn. It's right at that in between time. So it ties in there too. But yeah, that the idea of her illuminating, of showing mysteries, of teaching, And illuminating, when I say mysteries, it can be either something very personal, something, or just trying to figure out the base truth of the matter, or as you said, going into the obscure, the occult. And that bringing us back to witchcraft, I guess, the idea of her showing how to use the secrets of the universe to bring change, whatever that change is you're looking to create.
Yeah, and I
But
also in the same vein, I think of the Chaldean oracles, which we've talked about before, which is a set of writings we don't actually have. Unfortunately, the writings all we have are the commentaries that were probably written around the 2nd century CE. But the sort of, I'm going to really oversimplify here, but kind of the basic, I guess, worldview behind that is that there's these two deities, these two powers. There's the first father and the second father. And the first power is the power of what sometimes gets called the intellectual realm, but I think of more as what we would call the astral realm, where the second father rules over the material realm. And these are described as two fires. And Hekate stands between these two fires. She's specifically mentioned in the oracles as the world soul, the one who stands in the middle, right, between the two fires, which of course immediately makes me think of the two torches. But her role in standing between these two realms, sort of the material and the astral, is she's the mediator, right? She's the one who keeps the door open between those two realms. So in that sense, I mean, that's really what witchcraft is, right? I mean, even if you're doing like a spell to get a parking space, even in the most mundane idea, you're doing a spell to get a parking space. What you have is this idea, right, of the perfect parking space. And then you want to make it real, right? You want to make it material. You want to make it a place you can actually park. So you're mediating between those two realms. That's what magic is. And so Hekate, as the one who stands between these two fires in Chaldean metaphor, I guess, is the one who mediates between in that way. And that's what magic is right there. So that's one of the reasons I think of her as just the ultimate goddess of witchcraft.
Back to that liminality, having a foot in each world.
Yeah.
I trained for a few years with the shaman that lives upstairs. The shaman, a deep two owl. She lives above. Yeah, she lives above our shop. So I always refer to her as the shaman upstairs. And that's one thing that she would always talk about, the idea of in any kind of spiritual practice, the need to have a foot in both worlds. Both, to have a foot in practicality, a foot in the material, not to get lost in the woo of things, but also at the same time, we have a foot in the woo. We have a foot in the weird spiritual brouhaha, and we are the bridge as people of power of magic, which is whatever label you want to slap on. But and that's very much what Hekate does, isn't that? And then also just illuminating how to do that and illuminating the easily missed things, tying it right back to Phosphoros. The idea that, it's we're a lot of times we're trying to figure out how to make our own spiritual practice work for us, or how we connect best. And that's where she shines, where she can help illuminate where you can connect. And I don't want to get too far in connecting because I feel like there's going to be an epithet. There's an epithet down the road, both about liminality and connection. But I because of that in between and that guidance, I think that she's an amazing deity to connect to if you want to connect to other deities, which seems like a weird roundabout thing, right? But that in between nature of her, at least for me, has helped me. She has helped me create different with my understanding of epithets given to me by working with her. It's helped me understand how to do really, potent invocations of other deities or other powers. And that's part of that teaching aspect that comes with her, that illuminating. I don't want to get too much in teaching because that's, Tiara. There's going to be a lot of overlap. So the longer we go, the harder Robin and I are going to have to dig to get really good information to apply to these these epithets that we haven't already talked about. But that is Ultra. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess I want to talk a little bit more about this idea. You mentioned Hecate as being sort of a bridge to other powers. And I do,
Yeah.
for like in my own practice, like I don't just do Hecate work, right? I do all kinds of different things. I work with, I don't even just work with, Greek-based stuff. I have all kinds of
Mhm.
interests. I've been studying some Celtic sources really deeply lately. I've been into all kinds of things, but Hecate is always at the base of it. She's always kind of the first stop. If I'm interested in doing something, I'm trying to do something, or there's work I want to do, Hecate is the one to show me which way to go. She's the one
Mhm.
who kind of underpins it all for me, in my own work. That it's not that I'm running around doing Hecate work all the time, though I do have kind of daily Hecate practice, but she's the foundation. She's the bridge, right? She's the one who stands between this world and other worlds. And if we want to explore other worlds, she's the door.
And bringing us to the idea of filling things, and then kind of illuminating things when you're asking that question. If you make space to ask, whether that's in ceremony or just kind of putting it out there, there's then the aspect of trying to sit back and kind of let her guide you a little bit. And for me, it might be that gut tug towards something, or sometimes it's the right bit of information showing up at a really weird time that
Mhm.
just happens to line up exactly with what you were looking for.
Yes.
And that is her, in my experience, that is her tool of illumination. Both that, both that intuitive tugging, and then also just really weird happenstance where you're like, oh, there you are. There's exactly the thing I was looking for. Fantastic. Thanks.
Yeah.
um,
The more I work with Hecate, the more that kind of thing just happens constantly.
mhm.
Um, when I really maintain my daily Hecate practice, the number of weird coincidences, just the right thing falling into my lap, all that kind of stuff just escalates dramatically.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. That has been my experience as well. It is really, it makes for an interesting time for sure.
It does.
And there's also that aspect, of course, of looking at truth sometimes even when it's not comfortable to look at the truths,
Yes, absolutely.
with Phosphoros, because it's that sometimes things are kept in the dark because it's more comfortable.
Hmm.
It's, or you're living in that illusion because she's an illusion dispeller. That's part of what she does as a role as Phosphoros. That illusion is there because it's more comfortable, or that delusion, or whatever story you're spinning is there because it makes you comfortable, but it's not
Hmm.
the truth.
Yeah.
And that is the almost the double-edged sword of working with her in her Phosphoros aspect, because it's not it's not bad because you're understanding things in a deeper sense, but it's not comfortable.
Yeah. I've had some really major disruptions in my life brought about by doing Hecate practice that involve situations that, I was not being honest with myself about, that, Hecate practice shed light on and caused me to have to make some big changes that were not comfortable, and but were ultimately for the best. But yeah, she really shakes things up that way.
Which ties into some of her more destructive aspects as well. But it
Yeah,
really
and
is,
we'll get to that in
sometimes,
other epithets too.
yeah, yeah.
But the idea of, yeah,
But
sometimes seeing clearly can be very uncomfortable.
absolutely. Sometimes things are in the dark because we like it there. It makes me think of, I don't know, there's some comic going around on the socials uh, where the kid was like, "Oh, could you leave the light on?" And the parent turns on the light, and there's just like this awful monster face in the back, and turns it off. And says, "No way, we're gonna keep the lights off. It's way more freakier out there with the lights on, you know." And so
Okay.
sometimes that's a good metaphor for Hekate.
I actually really, really love that tagline for Hecate Phosphoros is it's way weirder with the lights on.
There we go. There we go. That's our tagline
Yep,
for
yep.
this episode right here.
So
It's way
much
weirder with
freakier
the
with the
light.
lights on.
Perfect. That's great. I
Yeah.
love it. Well, next, so I don't think I mentioned this on the first episode. We release this every other week. Uh, so this you'll be listening to this on Wednesday in a few days because we don't record it on Wednesday. This will be released on Wednesday the 15th and of May, and then the next episode will be released on May 29th. So it's every other week on Wednesdays. And next episode, we're going to be talking about Sudoku, which ties a little bit into what we've been talking about already. It's funny because it all connects, and that's how it's all wibbly wobbly and it connects. But any other notes on phosphorus?
I think we've covered it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you for being part of this as we're still getting our feet under us and figuring out the flow with everything. And we're really so excited about this. We have we have so many plans. We've had people reach out. We're going to have a few guest appearances on this podcast a little farther down the road. And I don't know. I'm really excited. I'm really excited. This is going to be great. But thank you everybody for listening. This has been Robin and Isaac on Epithets. Today was Phosphorus. If you have any questions or if you have any different epithets that you want to hear, you can find us on Facebook, Epithets the Podcast. Same the with Instagram, we're on there as well. So if there is something Hecatean you want to share, or if there's an epithet that you want to suggest to us to kind of talk about, or just want to stop by and say hi, you can find us there. Until next time in 2 weeks, when we cover Clytochus, thanks for being here.
Thanks, everyone.